A golden boy ascended to the throne of the world. His name was Gaius, but the legions who had adored him as a child gave him a nickname that would echo through history: Caligula. Little Boots. In the year 37 AD, Rome wept with joy. The cruel, paranoid Tiberius was dead, and in his place stood a young, handsome prince, the son of the beloved Germanicus. The people expected a savior. What they received was something else entirely. A dark alchemy was about to occur, where political power would fuse with intimate terror to create a new, grotesque form of control. This is not merely a story of an emperor's madness. It is the autopsy of a system, a chilling blueprint of how sexual violence, when wielded with imperial authority, can become the most potent weapon of all. The first cracks in the golden facade appeared not in the Senate House or on the battlefield, but in the most sacred spaces of Roman life. The Vestal Virgins were the living heartbeat of the city. Sworn to 30 years of absolute chastity, their purity was not a personal virtue, but the spiritual keystone of Rome itself. To harm them was to invite the wrath of the gods and condemn the city. Caligula did not merely harm one. He weaponized the very concept of their sanctity. In the chill of an autumn evening in 38 AD, the Virgo Vestalis Maxima, Cornelia, was summoned to the Palatine Hill. The pretext was a matter of state, a question of ritual observance. She arrived, the white of her stola and the sacred infula in her hair marking her as inviolable. The chamber she entered was not set for administration, but for a perverse ceremony. An altar draped in purple stood at its center. Caligula, flanked by his most sycophantic courtiers and several senators from families opposing his policies, greeted her not as a priestess, but as a bride. If a Vestal may not take a husband, his voice cut through the incense-heavy air, then she shall marry Rome itself. And who, pray tell, is Rome? Look upon your groom. The laughter of the courtiers was nervous, edged with fear. What followed was a meticulously staged desecration. With his own hands, the Emperor of Rome untied the linen infula from Cornelia's hair, an act for which any other man would have been scourged and buried alive. The sacred sash, symbol of her covenant with the goddess Vesta, fell to the marble floor. This was not a rape committed in shadow. It was a ritual performed under the flickering light of oil lamps, witnessed by Rome's elite. The violation was physical, but its true purpose was symbolic and political. Cornelia's brother, a stern traditionalist in the Senate, had been leading the opposition to Caligula's exorbitant new taxes. The next morning, that same brother was summoned to the imperial presence. Caligula, fresh from his bath, regarded him with a cold smile. "Your family's honor," he stated calmly, "now resides within the confines of my bedchamber. Shall we now discuss your voting habits on the grain levy?" The brother voted as commanded. Cornelia survived, performing a brutal rite of self-purification that left her an invalid. The lesson was learned. Sacred boundaries were meaningless. A priestess's body could be a ledger for political debt. But Caligula was an architect, not just a vandal. He did not stop at individual acts of terror. He sought to institutionalize humiliation, to build an engine of degradation that would run on the very fuel of Roman society: family, status, and gender. Thus, in 39 AD, the Lupanar Imperiale, the Imperial Brothel, was born within the walls of the Palatine Palace itself. This was no common vice den. It was a gilded prison, a theater of cruelty dressed in silk. The attendants were not professional courtesans. They were the wives and daughters of senators, knights, and wealthy equestrians, invited to serve the state in this new capacity. Their rooms were not cells but opulent sets, each named for a goddess: the Grotto of Venus, the Hall of Minerva. The degradation was bureaucratized. Each woman wore a delicate gold tag around her neck. Engraved upon it was not her name, but her husband's, his full name: his rank in the Senate, and the precise amount he owed to the imperial treasury. The body of the noblewoman became a walking bill of sale, a collateral for her family's financial and political obedience. The horror reached its zenith during the infamous bidding dinners. Caligula would host lavish feasts for foreign dignitaries and senators alike. After the wine flowed freely, the attendance would be presented. The emperor would then announce a game. "Gentlemen," he would proclaim, "the goddesses are available for intercession. But even divine favor has a price. You may bid, in gold, right here, right now, for the exclusive companionship of your own wife for the evening. The highest bidder spares her from serving another. The lowest, well." The room would fall into a silence thick with dread. Men were forced to publicly price their own dignity and the value of their spouse's autonomy. The bids would start, voices trembling. 5,000 sesterces, 10,000. The amounts were not won. They were immediately added to the senator's existing debt. One senator, the elderly and stoic Gaius Appius, finally broke. When his wife, a dignified woman of an ancient patrician family, was brought forth, he remained silent, his jaw clenched. "No bid?" Caligula asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. "So you value her at nothing? A prudent financial decision, Appius." He then nodded to a guard. "Since she is worth nothing, let her be a prize. Give her to the victors of today's gladiatorial games." The message was seared into every mind. Compliance meant financial ruin. Resistance meant utter, bestial destruction. Yet, to understand the full scope of Caligula's intimate tyranny, one must confront the most unsettling relationship of his reign, that with his sister, Julia Drusilla. Whether their bond crossed into physical incest remains locked in the past, shielded by ancient gossip and political slander. But Caligula's manipulation of perception was itself a profound violation. He didn't need to commit the act. He needed everyone to believe he could and would. He treated Drusilla with a possessiveness that scandalized Rome. At her wedding to Marcus Lepidus, he was said to have kissed her with a passion unbecoming of a brother. He had her recline beside him at state banquets in the position reserved for a consort. When she fell gravely ill, he issued an unprecedented decree. Every temple in Rome, every citizen in their home, was to offer sacrifices for the health of the emperor's wife and sister. The conflation was deliberate and shocking. Upon her death in 38 AD, his grief transcended the personal and entered the realm of the imperial grotesque. He declared a public mourning period longer than for any empress. Then he went further. He had the Senate deify her as Panthea Drusilla, Drusilla the all-goddess. She became the first Roman woman consecrated as a divine being in her own right. Her ivory statue was placed in the temple of Venus Genetrix, and priests were appointed for her cult. Shortly after, Caligula formally proposed a law to the Senate legalizing marriage between siblings. As our wise ancestors, the Egyptians, have long practiced to preserve the purity of the royal line. The Senate, trembling, managed to delay and obstruct it. The point, however, was made. No social taboo, not even the fundamental prohibition against incest woven into the Roman moral fabric, was beyond his reach. The family itself was not a sanctuary. It was another frontier for imperial conquest. By 40 AD, Caligula's megalomania had shed all pretense. He no longer saw himself as first among men, but as a god walking the earth. His ultimate performance of this belief was his marriage, not to a mortal woman, but to Juno, queen of the gods. This was not a metaphor or a poetic fancy. It was a literal, staged event that perverted the very core of Roman state religion. He commandeered the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Palatine Hill. Before the colossal cult statue of Jupiter, he had a golden bridal couch installed. Dressed in the costume of Jupiter himself, purple robes, an eagle-topped scepter, A fake thunderbolt in hand, he lay beside the silent marble god and proceeded to simulate consummating the divine marriage, while the temple's horrified priests were forced to witness at sword point. Yet even this blasphemous theater needed a human anchor, a vessel for his particular brand of cruelty. For this, he chose Claudia Pulchra. Her significance was precise. She was the last direct descendant of Octavia Minor, sister of Augustus. In her veins flowed the pure blood of the original Julian line, the very legitimacy that Caligula's branch descended through the controversial marriages of Livia and the adoptions of Tiberius could never truly claim. He dressed her in the ritual garments of Juno, placed the peacock feather crown upon her head, and positioned her beside the statue. Leaning close, in a whisper that echoed perfectly in the temple's acoustics, he said for all to hear, "The goddess borrows your form tonight." After the ceremony, Claudia was installed in a small chamber attached to the Temple of Juno as the goddess's earthly vessel. Pilgrims seeking Juno's favor now had to approach Claudia and pay for her intercessory prayers, all coins flowing directly into Caligula's drained treasury. When she was discovered to be pregnant months later, Caligula announced to a stunned Rome that Juno was blessing the empire with a divine heir. The child, a boy, was stillborn. Within days, Claudia Pulchra was executed on Caligula's orders for the crime of defrauding the divine. The last pure Julian was erased, her bloodline and her body consumed by the emperor. Monstrous vanity. The final frontier of Caligula's intimate reign of terror was gender itself. If he could violate the sacred, the familial, and the divine, then the very distinction between man and woman was merely another boundary to be trampled. He began systematically targeting senior senators, particularly those with distinguished military careers, forcing them to become his symbolic wives. The most infamous case was Senator Marcus Vinicius, a hardened general who had earned his honors fighting Germanic tribes on the empire's bloody frontiers. Caligula ordered him to set aside his toga and wear the stola and palla of a Roman matron. For an entire month, Vinicius was forced to appear in public dressed as a woman, his face covered by the delicate flammeum, the bridal veil. At state functions, he was seated among the wives of senators, where Caligula would refer to him fondly as "my newest bride." The emperor would often kiss him full on the mouth before turning to visiting dignitaries and asking, "Is my wife not beautiful?" This was more than a cruel joke. It was the ultimate loyalty test. These senator wives were compelled to legally divorce their actual spouses and rewrite their wills, bequeathing their entire estates to the emperor. Those who complied were eventually forgiven and allowed to return to public life, penniless, stripped of dignity, but alive. Those who refused were dragged to the executioner's block. The message was absolute. Every aspect of a Roman man's identity, his public honor, his private family, his very masculinity, was not his own. It was property of the emperor, to be reshaped, violated, or discarded on a whim. On January 24th, 41 AD, the nightmare ended in a blur of steel in a palace corridor. The Praetorian Guard, joined by senators he had humiliated beyond endurance, cut Caligula down. The Senate, in a fever of relief and rage, immediately decreed a Damnatio Memoriae, the total erasure of his memory. His statues were smashed, his name chiseled from monuments, his coins melted. They sought to purify Rome by pretending he never existed. But they failed. Some stains cannot be scrubbed from stone. The living gallery victims returned to families that greeted them with averted eyes and hurried silences. The Imperial Brothel's rooms were converted into storerooms for grain. The Temple of Juno echoed with 3 days of purification rites. Yet in the dark of Roman bedrooms, the trauma lived on. A senator would flinch violently at a touch on his shoulder. A Vestal would wake screaming, the ghost of silk sheets haunting her coarse linen. A once beautiful patrician would stare at a marble statue in a garden, not with admiration, but with a shudder of horrific recognition. The true legacy of Caligula was not the catalog of his personal perversions. It was the terrifying system he revealed as possible. He demonstrated that sexual violence could be bureaucratized, that humiliation could be a sustainable fuel for power. He proved that an entire civilization, its senators, its priests, its soldiers, could be made complicit, could be trained to laugh nervously while their colleagues were raped, to offer prayers at a blasphemous wedding, to stand by and watch. He created a blueprint where absolute power sought not just to rule the body, but to possess the soul, to rewrite the very rules of sacredness, family, and identity. His reign stands as a grotesque lighthouse in the sea of history, its beam illuminating a chilling truth. The most dangerous monster is not the one who commits atrocities in secret, but the one who stages them in the open, who makes the horror a public spectacle and dares the world to call it anything but imperial privilege. The story of Caligula is a warning, etched not in marble, but in the fragile memory of human dignity. A warning that any system which grants one person unlimited power will, inevitably, create the conditions for its own Caligula to emerge.